Day 1359 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,155,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,180 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 2 tanks, 11 APVs, 9 artillery, 2 air defense systems, and another successful strike on an oil refinery. So headed to the map where drone sanctions were applied overnight into Tatarstan, 1,100 kilometers or about 700 miles from Ukraine's border, where the early morning skies briefly turned into smoked refinery black, with fires and secondary flashes reported at the Tenneco refinery complex, resulting from the AVT primary oil processing unit taking a hit. Footage shows a column of smoke and visible flames inside the main industrial block, followed by reports of power flickers across parts of the city, as the disturbances began shortly after regional air defense alerts. Now, this Tenneco refinery is among Russia's largest downstream hubs, built to handle a high-volume crude slate through several AVT units that feed its hydro treatment and conversion lines. The site's configuration means that any disruption to a primary unit forces throughput cuts across dependent downstream processes, and a unit of this tier typically handles several million tons per year, forming part of the intake backbone for the entire plant. But despite events of this magnitude continuing to unfold within Russia, it still doesn't shift Moscow's calculus of war, just adding another crack to a system they insist is unbroken. Next up on the map, to Oriol, as Ukrainian aerial strike assets again reached into this region overnight, with explosions and air defense fire reported over the city as incoming targets were engaged near the region's power plant. Nighttime videos from the city show tracer fire arcing skyward, intercept flashes, and then glowing fragments falling back over urban districts, leaving smoke plumes and small fires on the ground. Local authorities said air defense systems shot down several aerial targets and described damage as limited to windows and auxiliary buildings, while footage geolocated by independent monitors points to impact flashes in the industrial belt around Oriol's main combined heat and power plant. So this latest incident follows a confirmed Ukrainian strike on the same thermal power plant earlier this month, when upgraded Neptune cruise missiles hit open switchgear and triggered significant power disruptions before operators rerouted supply. The 330 megawatt plant covers the largest share of the city's demands, which is a location that's close to defense-linked manufacturing facilities, which means that even temporary disruptions ripple into workshops, operations, and other support and maintenance cycles for Russian units relying on rear area repair capacity. As of now, the power plant is in shutdown mode at Oriol following this latest inbound wave. In fact, unverified reports of Ukraine's Flamingo cruise missiles are becoming rampant, suggested to have been related to this latest update, but also for occupied Crimea, where the Morskoy oil terminal, alongside a helicopter parking strip and a storage and maintenance base for enemy strike and reconnaissance UAVs, all becoming targets of several dozen inbound Ukrainian drones overnight at the Pokrovsk airfield. Additional reports had surfaced of a radar installation near Yevpatoria in Crimea that was struck during this overnight wave of attacks. And then just before these events, next up briefly in Novokubansk of Krasnodar Krai, being an area dealing in blackouts after failure at the power substation, potentially caused by an industrial scale short circuit based on readily available information, thereby suggesting another strain-related incident within the overstressed power network. Hard to imagine these types of outcomes being in short supply this winter. Then also to mention on the map, overnight, more smoke-filled regions of Russia could be seen, including where a fire broke out in the village of Nikolskoy of Belgorod. Following a drone strike, local posts described a sharp detonation before the blaze, though the details on the affected site have not yet come to bear. Then to the main map, into the active center, with latest updates on Russian troops attempting small group infiltrations towards Myrnorad using drones for targeting and motorcycles for logistics. Ukrainian defenders maintain control of supply routes and, specifically, block further Russian use of Krasny Lerman as a launch area. There's also been a continued flood of reports describing hundreds of newly arrived Russian troops every day into the southwestern axis at Pokrovsk, with many redeployed from the Kherson and Zaporizhia sectors being rushed into the town area with daily assaults and minimal coordination, often without proper unit reassignment or rest. Now, despite Moscow's earlier claims on October 30th of encirclement of the two frontline towns, Ukrainian forces remain active across the agglomeration. For instance, newly released footage from the Skala 425 unit shows assault elements conducting clearing operations in parts of Pokrovsk, moving street by street to identify and neutralize enemy positions. Even still, the situation in the Pokrovsk axis remains complicated, and we've also seen where a recent large-scale enemy assault using light vehicles along the Seladova-Pokrovsk highway achieved only partial success on the one hand, and Ukrainian soldiers destroying Russian equipment during the assault along the same highway on the other hand. Several vehicles were destroyed on the approaches to the city, and additional enemy equipment was neutralized inside of Pokrovsk. Ultimately, as it comes to the town, Russian elements are phasing in securing outskirts and pressing the center, despite the last 2 weeks of local Ukrainian resilience, or perhaps more accurately described as the past 15 months. Suffice it to say, it's a mutual consent meat grinder. The aggressor is fine to push, and the defender has no objection to that. Both sides accepting this reality, because Russian assaults should always be on the move, but movement means it's their own personnel's elimination. Thus, more meat is required to penetrate the front to create a void, followed by more meat to clear it. Meanwhile, up in the nearby Dobrapilla front, the Ukrainian defense forces pushed back the enemy near Shikovo, although the invading forces had also correspondingly pushed forward just before Volodymyrivka, which, taken together, is tightening the contact point on this axis. Next on the map, and further up in Konstantinivka, as Russians tried to use heavy fog to break through into the city, hoping for that element of surprise. The operation failed, in this case, due to the recon of the 28th Brigade that spotted the enemy in time, with that false confidence of the fog's shroud turning into a trap for the Russians, with their artillery, trucks, motorcycles, and more feeling the wrath. Meanwhile, up in the Sumy region, Russian troops attempted to infiltrate Ukrainian lines through a network of sewer pipes, an effort that ended in chaos underground. The group was detected before surfacing. The Ukrainian defenders opened fire the moment the first soldiers emerged. The rest fled back into the tunnels, leaving the attempt in ruins. Underground doesn't mean unseen, especially these days. Russian military channels later confirmed the movement and branded it as a reconnaissance effort meant to bypass frontline fortifications. Nonetheless, becoming a compromised operation due to pre-positioned surveillance with alert defenders from the sector's local units. Ukrainian monitoring reports also suggest that the would-be Russian infiltrators likely relied on outdated maps of the sewer system and were caught when those routes led directly into monitored zones, then headed near to the opposite edge of the map to Berdyansk, as Ukraine's kamikaze drones attacked targets in this occupied rear and said to have made an impact on a local military fuel depot. In fact, this strike was likely performed in coordination with the overnight strikes in Crimea, mentioned earlier, with a lot of supporting information now showing that one of the most common strike platforms of choice used by the AFU in these types of air raids is the new FP2 drone, which, although being significantly shorter ranged of a one-way attack drone compared to the very successful long-range FP1 sibling, it does, however, include a heavier payload of about 100 kilograms or approximately 220 pounds, which makes it slightly heavier than a warhead coming out of a HIMARS rocket. Beyond that, these FP2s are reported to employ autonomous flight and targeting with optional manual control for additional precision. All up, it's turning into a nightmare for the Russian military in Crimea and beyond. Now, to take a look around the map, somewhere in the east, Ukrainian soldiers from the 8th Special Operations Forces Regiment cleared Russian positions in the Donetsk region. As a result, Special Forces eliminated 3 Russian soldiers and seized their radios and personal documents. Also on the map, another flying Ukrainian shotgun shows itself, taking care of business. and always capturing the imagination. But then even more formidable in the sky, footage of the shootdown of a Shahed drone with an M134 minigun. Add to that another example coming from night, the minigun again, shown with the greenish hue of the image intensifier-based night vision. Now to the news, with President Zelensky holding a virtual meeting with a bipartisan group of US senators, briefing them on frontline conditions near Pokrovsk, Ukraine's air defense buildup, and ongoing weapons needs. The talks also focused on the newly introduced Sanction in Russia Act of 2025, a sweeping Senate-House package designed to intensify US economic pressure on Moscow. The act, co-sponsored by 80+ senators from both parties, mandates a 500% tariff on all Russian imports, and on all goods from any country continuing to trade Russian oil, gas, or uranium. It also blocks access to US financial systems for Russian state-linked banks, and prohibits US energy exports to Russia. Zelensky thanked the senators for their unwavering bicameral and bipartisan support, stressing that such legislative action is as vital as battlefield aid. Meanwhile, in Russian news, Kremlin's spokesbrush Dmitry Peskov stated that Russia hopes Donald Trump is still willing to help facilitate a diplomatic and political resolution to the crisis in Ukraine via means of an upcoming Budapest summit, an event previously called off by the US administration after Moscow continued to not act in good faith for peace negotiations. At the same time, Peskov accused Europe of preparing for war with Russia, citing the increase in defense budgets in almost all European countries, which is sort of a point seemingly lost on the Kremlin, given that Europe's military buildup stems directly from Russia's own aggressive invasion tactics. Now to a very interesting bite of Ukrainian hardware news, as Ukraine is preparing to field a revolutionary air defense network known as the Drone Wall, developed by the French company Atriad, to defend against persistent Russian loitering munitions and aerial glide munition threats. According to the maker, the system has already been delivered and is slated to go operational within weeks. The system, identified as Model DWS-1, comprises dozens of drones, up to 200, of the FPV-type interceptor drones, integrated into an AI-controlled swarm. Each drone is battery-powered, launches from ground platforms when radar detects a threat, and can form a layered aerial curtain intended to intercept, for instance, incoming Shahed drones. Atriad reports several key features: operational in GPS-denied electronic warfare environments via preloaded 3D maps, with one operator being able to manage up to 100 drones simultaneously. And added to that, a very low cost per interception ratio, with reusable drones if they do not detonate. Initially, the system will protect cities and critical infrastructure, and where successful, it may be moved closer to the front line to counter aviation-launched glide munitions and faster jet-powered enemy drones. So, from a strategic perspective, having a low-cost and reusable interceptor-per-shot structure versus a multi-million-dollar surface-to-air missile system changes the economics of aerial defense. If the drone wall works as expected, it could give Ukraine notably improved resilience against set-piece airstrikes. Moreover, this marks a potential first in combat. Ukraine will become the first country to operationally deploy such a system, which could make it a testbed for future high-volume drone defense networks worldwide. And so, where the system proves reliable in combat, it may just become a template for other frontline states or NATO partners, with Ukraine once again changing the dynamics of warfare. Now to head across to a super quick funny to round out the video with more of a Kremlin paranoia or happening news piece. As it turns out, the Kremlin's obsession with control runs so deep, even Putin's office has backup copies. An investigation by Radio Free Europe's investigative unit found that at least 3 identical beige offices were built for Putin himself in Novo-Agarevo, Sochi, and the Valdai Forest Retreat. Each so perfectly matched that only tiny details give away this duplicate copy reality. Door handles, wall seams, even the wood grain on a desk tray became forensic clues in what might be the world's most expensive game of Spot the Difference. Journalists cross-checked more than 700 official videos and government procurement data, finding that the Kremlin repeatedly faked the stated location of Putin's meetings. In one 2018 case, a televised event said to be from Moscow was actually filmed in Valdai. And now, well, since early 2025, nearly every beige office appearance, 29 out of the 30, was filmed at Putin's northwest of Moscow Forest compound. the Valdai retreat, which now happens to be ringed by approximately a dozen air defense systems, Pantsers, and S-400s, up to 18 in total. Oh, it all adds up. So the investigation suggests Valdai has effectively become the president's fortified bubble, giving him the utmost sense of protection, surrounded by pine trees, S-400s, and paranoia. We knew of the duplicated officers some time ago, but that was only through a rare handful of unconfirmed sources inside of Russia. Overall, at scale, the Clone Office project reveals something deeper. Russia's rulers have divorced image from place. Identical backdrops keep the illusion of control as reality shifts behind the curtains. In Putin's Russia, even the furniture knows how to lie. The afterwar books and documentaries about Putin's mental state and run-and-hide tactics during the war will become the stuff of legend. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe. Thanks once again for all of the support, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!